My fiancé left me at the altar because a coworker told him she liked him. When he came back 3 years later expecting I'd still be waiting, I shut the door in his face. I was standing in a room behind the church, dressed and holding my bouquet, when Miriam walked in to tell me Mitch wasn't coming. Said his best man Greg had just called from the parking lot. Mitch had texted Greg 20 minutes before the ceremony saying he couldn't go through with it. He never called me, never came to the church. Just sent a text to Greg and left him to figure out how to handle a church full of guests and a bride waiting in a back room. 140 people sat in those pews. My dad had taken out a loan to help cover the reception. My grandmother flew in from Puerto Rico first time on a plane in 11 years. My bridesmaids had burned vacation days for this. And Mitch sent a text to his best man from his own apartment while I stood there waiting to walk down the aisle. I didn't hear from him for nearly 2 weeks. When he finally surfaced, it was through an email. Said a coworker named Tara had told him the night before the wedding that she had feelings for him. Said it hit him like a wall. Made him realize he had unresolved emotions to sort through before committing to anyone. He left me at the altar because a woman from his office said she liked him the night before our wedding. I never responded. Returned what I could from the wedding. My dad never mentioned the loan again. My grandmother went home without saying Mitch's name once. 4 months later, I learned Mitch and Tara had dated briefly, and it fizzled, she told him weeks in, that her confession had been more impulse than anything real. He left me on my wedding day over an impulse. Over the following 3 years, I rebuilt everything he'd torn down, paid off the remaining wedding costs myself so my dad wouldn't carry it, got promoted twice at work, moved into a nicer apartment, started running, which somehow turned into something I genuinely loved. Met a man named Gio at a friend's birthday dinner about a year and a half later. Kind, consistent, showed up exactly when he said he would. We took it slow because I needed slow, and he never once made that feel like a burden. First time I told him about the wedding, the text to Greg, the email 2 weeks later, he just listened. Didn't try fixing anything. Didn't ask whether I was over it. Just sat there and let me say everything that needed saying. By the time Mitch resurfaced, Gio and I had been together over a year, already talking about moving in together. 3 years and 2 months after the wedding that never happened, Mitch showed up at my apartment on a Saturday afternoon. I opened the door to find him standing there, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rehearsed every word. Told me he'd made the worst mistake of his life. Said 3 years of thinking it over had made it clear I was who he was supposed to be with. Said if I gave him one more chance, he'd spend the rest of his life making it right. I asked what exactly he thought would happen here. He said he knew me, knew I'd always believed in second chances. He was using something I'd once told him about myself as a lever to get back in. That's the thing about people like Mitch. They don't hear what you share as something given freely, they hear it as inventory. They catalog every soft spot, every belief, every story you've ever told about yourself, file it away for whenever they need a weapon against you. Then he said the thing with Tara was something that happened to him, not something he chose. Said he panicked, made a snap decision he regretted instantly. Called walking away from our wedding a snap decision. The same thing that left 140 people sitting in a church. Left my father absorbing the cost of a reception that never happened. Left my grandmother flying across an ocean for nothing. Called all of that the equivalent of picking wrong off a menu. I told him about Gio. His face shifted. Asked how long, and I told him. Asked if it was serious, and I said yes. Then he looked at me and said, I just think if he really knew you the way I do, he'd understand why I'm here. Possessive and dismissive of Gio in the same breath, like Gio was temporary and he was the permanent fixture. Something hot flared behind my ribs. Not sadness, not hurt, just clean, focused anger. The kind that goes quiet instead of loud. I told him, you don't know me. You knew a version of me that doesn't exist anymore, because you're the one who killed her. Mitch flinched. Took a breath, switched to that calm, measured tone. Said he'd been in therapy, done the work, wasn't asking for everything at once, just a conversation. Coffee. 1 hour. Said just 1 hour, like 60 minutes of my time was some small ask. Like he hadn't already taken far more than that from me already. He was performing humility, but every word still circled back to what he wanted. Not once did he ask what I wanted. Not once did he ask if I was okay. In his mind, the story only had one possible ending, me saying yes. I told him, I don't owe you an hour, don't owe you a minute, don't owe you a single word, Mitch. You sent a text to Greg. Couldn't even face me that day, and now showing up 3 years later somehow counts as brave? This is just you running out of other options. His face crumbled. For a second, it looked like something might actually land. Then he rebuilt his expression in real time and said, I know you're angry. I deserve that. But you used to tell me holding on to anger only hurts the person holding it. He was reaching back into the woman I used to be and weaponizing my own words against me. I told him, don't you ever use my words against me again. Then I stepped back and shut the door, turned the lock. Decided not to tell Gio about it, didn't want to give Mitch any real estate in the life I'd built. That was my mistake. A man who sends a breakup text to his best man 20 minutes before his own wedding doesn't understand the word no. 3 days later, Miriam called. Her voice carried a tightness that dropped my stomach before she even spoke. Said Mitch had messaged her on social media, wanting her to talk to me on his behalf. He'd written, I know she listens to you. I just need someone to help her see people can change. I told her to block him. She already had. Then she asked, did you tell Gio? I closed my eyes and said no. She told me I needed to. If Mitch was reaching out to her, he'd reach out to others. I didn't want Gio finding out from someone else that my ex was circling. She was right. I knew it the moment the words left her mouth. But knowing she was right and actually wanting that conversation were two entirely different things. I got off the phone, finished cooking dinner, didn't eat a bite of it, just pushed food around the plate, trying to figure out how to tell Gio without blowing it up bigger than necessary. Except it already was big. Mitch had shown up at my apartment. I'd closed the door on him, and instead of backing off, he'd gone around me straight to my best friend. That's not a man taking a hint, that's a man executing a plan. That night, I told Gio everything. Mitch on the doorstep. What he'd said about knowing me better than Gio did. The door, the lock, the message to Miriam. He listened to all of it without cutting in. When I finished, he asked why I hadn't told him right away. His voice wasn't angry. I told him I didn't want to give Mitch any power over our life together. Said Mitch didn't deserve space in our home, in anything we'd built. Gio nodded slowly, then said, I get that, but we're a team. You don't have to carry things alone anymore. Because for 3 straight years, alone had just been my default setting, and I hadn't even noticed I was still running on it until he pointed it out. He sat quiet a minute, then asked if I thought Mitch would actually stop. I told him I didn't know. Next day, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Greg, same Greg who'd taken that text in the parking lot 3 years back, who'd had to walk into a church and tell 140 people something terrible. He sounded worn down. Said Mitch had been calling nonstop, kept insisting he just needed one conversation with me, told him to leave it alone, but he won't listen. Then he added, I was the one who had to tell everyone at the church that day. Lost friends over it. Don't want to get caught in the middle of this again. I told him, then don't be. Tell him I said no, and if he contacts anyone else in my life, I'll treat it as harassment. Greg said he'd pass it on. Something in his flat, quiet tone told me he doubted it would even matter. That weekend, Gio and I went out for dinner, supposed to be a normal Saturday night, walked through the front door and I spotted him immediately. Mitch, sitting alone near the entrance, a glass of water in front of him, eyes fixed on the door, not eating, not even looking at a menu. He stood the second he saw me. My whole body went cold. This wasn't a coincidence. He knew we'd be there, either tracking my routine or asking around about my weekend habits, and I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. He approached with his hands raised slightly, going for casual. Said, I'm not here to cause trouble, just want 5 minutes. Gio stepped half in front of me. She told you no. You need to leave. Mitch didn't even glance at him, looked straight past Gio at me and said, Are you really going to let him speak for you? That's the moment I fully understood what this was. Mitch wasn't here out of love. He was here because I'd said no, and he simply couldn't accept it. I'd said no, so he went to Miriam. Miriam said no, so he went to Greg. Greg said no, so he showed up somewhere I was supposed to feel safe. He wanted me alone, because alone is easier to manipulate. Wanted me without Gio standing there, since Gio is living proof I'd moved on, and Mitch couldn't bear looking at that proof. That question, are you really going to let him speak for you, was never about my voice. It was about control. He was trying to shrink me for letting the man I loved stand beside me. I said nothing, grabbed Gio's arm, walked us straight out. In the car, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury. I looked at Gio and said, I'm calling my dad. When I told him what was happening, the line went silent a long time. My dad still carried the weight of that loan. Never once complained, but I knew it had changed things for him. Then he spoke in a voice I hadn't heard since childhood, the one that meant somebody had crossed a line they couldn't walk back. He said he'd handle it. I told him no, this was my fight, but I needed him beside me when I finished it, because I was done running from Mitch. Next time he showed up, I was going to say every single thing I'd been holding in for 3 years, and he was going to hear it with witnesses present. I called Miriam, laid out the plan. She said, he followed you? That's not romantic. That's a man treating you like an object he misplaced and now wants back. I told her I needed one final confrontation with Mitch, not in public where he could control the spin, but at my apartment, on my terms, with Gio and my dad in the room, not for protection. Because Mitch had spent 3 years building himself into the hero of his own story, and I wanted witnesses present when I tore that story apart so he couldn't rewrite it afterward. Miriam said, good, end it. Then I called Greg myself, told him to relay that I'd give Mitch his 5 minutes. Saturday, my apartment, 2 o'clock. Greg sounded relieved. I didn't mention Gio or my dad would be there. I wanted Mitch walking through that door, convinced he'd won, that the restaurant, the messages to my friends, the persistence had all paid off. Wanted hope plastered across his face when he arrived, so the moment he saw who was actually waiting, he'd understand exactly how wrong he'd been. That night I sat at my dining table with a notebook. Didn't write a speech. Wrote a list. Not feelings. Not how Mitch made me feel or why I was angry. Numbers. Real, hard numbers. The dollar figure on my dad's loan. 14 months, how long it took me to pay it off. $312, my grandmother Emmeline's round-trip ticket for a flight she took for the first time in 11 years. My bridesmaids' burned sick days. The deposits. The flowers. The cake. The photographer. Every therapy session I'd paid out of pocket. Every week spent across from a stranger trying to understand why the person supposed to love me most couldn't even bother showing up. By the time I finished, the list nearly filled a page. I wasn't planning to read it aloud to him. I just needed to see it laid out in one place so I wouldn't soften the moment I stood in front of him. The truth had a price tag, and he was going to hear every cent of it. Saturday morning I woke up calm. Not the fake calm where you're forcing everything down, actually calm. Gio arrived before noon, settled onto the couch. My dad showed up at one sharp, button-down shirt, sleeves rolled, sat at the dining table with his hands flat against the surface, waiting. Miriam texted at 1:30. Say everything you need to say. Don't hold a single word back. I set my phone down and looked around. Gio steady on the couch. My dad quiet and ready at the table. The list tucked in the side drawer where I'd left it. The apartment sat so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Everything was set. 2 o'clock approaching, and this time I was the one deciding how it ended. At exactly 2, a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mitch standing there in a clean shirt, freshly shaved, holding a single flower like he'd arrived for a first date. He started to smile. Then his eyes drifted past me and landed on Gio sitting on the couch. The smile dropped instantly. His eyes found my dad at the table. His expression cycled from hopeful to confused to something bordering on panic. He said, "What is this?" I said, "Come in. You wanted your 5 minutes." He stayed frozen in the doorway. Said, "I thought it'd just be us." I told him, "You gave up just us the moment you sent a text to Greg instead of walking into that church." "Come in or leave. Your call." He stepped inside. I closed the door behind him. Mitch stood in the middle of my living room, and his presence felt wrong, somehow like a stain on something clean. He turned his whole body toward Gio and said, "I don't know what she's told you about me, but I'm not the bad guy here. I made a mistake, and I'm trying to make it right." That's more than most people manage. Gio didn't flinch, didn't say a word, just looked at me, calm and steady, communicating without speaking. "This is yours. I'm here. Go ahead." But Mitch wasn't finished. His voice dropped lower, almost man to man. Said, "I've known her 6 years. You've known her what, a year? You're the rebound, man. She's settling because she doesn't think she can trust anyone enough to have what we had." I watched Gio's jaw lock tight. Behind me came the scrape of a chair my dad pushing back from the table, palms flat, starting to rise with an expression I'd only seen a handful of times in my entire life. The room sat 1 second from exploding. I raised my hand, Gio settled back down. He looked up at me. I said, "It took me 14 months to pay off that loan. 14 months of extra shifts and skipped dinners, because every spare dollar went toward cleaning up what you left behind. My grandmother Emmeline's plane ticket cost $312. She hadn't flown in 11 years, and she boarded one for our wedding. When it didn't happen, she had a panic attack on the flight back home. My bridesmaids used sick days they'll never get back, standing inside a church you never bothered to walk into. You called it a snap decision. Here's exactly what that snap decision cost." I went through every line on that list, the deposits, the flowers, the cake that sat untouched in a back room, the photographer who showed up to an empty ceremony, the therapy I'd financed out of my own pocket. I laid every figure out, calm and exact, the way you'd present evidence in a courtroom, because that's precisely what this was. Mitch leaned forward, about to say something. I told him, "You had 3 years to talk. You have 5 minutes to listen." He sat back. I asked, "Do you want to know what it was like, standing in that back room?" I remember every second of it, the sound of my dress fabric when I moved, the light through the window, catching my own reflection thinking I was about to marry the man I loved. Then the door opened and Miriam walked in. "You made my best friend walk into that room and tell me my fiancé wasn't coming. You couldn't do it yourself. Couldn't call me. Couldn't walk into that church and look me in the eyes. You sent a text to Greg, and Greg called Miriam, and Miriam had to stand in front of me in my wedding dress and say the words you were too cowardly to say." Mitch was staring down at his hands. I said, "It wasn't even that you left. It's that you couldn't manage the basic decency to tell me yourself. You outsourced the worst moment of my entire life to your best man through a text message. That's not a snap decision. That's exactly who you are." His eyes had gone red at the edges. I turned to what he'd said to Gio. "You walked into my home today, looked at the man I love, and called him a rebound. Looked at Gio, who has shown up for me every single day since I met him, and called him temporary. Tried tearing down the best thing to happen to me since you left. And you did it because you can't stand that I'm happy without you. That's not love. That's ego. You don't miss me. You miss how I made you feel about yourself." Mitch opened his mouth. I said, "I'm not finished." His mouth closed, hands gripping his knees, knuckles bleached white. I said, "You told me the Tara situation just happened to you, that it hit you out of nowhere, that you panicked. You've been repeating that line for 3 years, things happening to you. So let me tell you what happened to me. I got left at the altar. Had to walk out of that church past 140 people who all knew before I did. Had to watch my dad pretend he wasn't devastated. A small sound came from behind me, the sound a man makes when he's fighting hard not to cry and losing that fight. I knew it was my dad. I kept going. Had to return wedding gifts. Had to explain to coworkers why I wasn't off on a honeymoon. Had to sit across from my grandmother on a video call, watching her try to comfort me, when she was the one who'd flown for the first time in over a decade for absolutely nothing. I had to rebuild my whole life from scratch, and I did it without you. So don't sit in my apartment telling me things happened to you. Things happened to me, Mitch. You were just the cause of them." The room went silent, the particular silence that settles after something true has been said, with nothing left to add. Mitch sat in that chair like a man with nothing left in him. The clean shirt, the freshly shaved face, the whole small performance, all of it gone. He looked up at me, voice cracking, and said he was sorry. For the first time since the email, since showing up, since the messages and the restaurant ambush, it actually sounded like he meant it. I looked at him a long moment, then said, "I believe you, but it doesn't change a single thing. We're done. We were done 3 years ago, you just never knew it, because you never bothered asking." I walked to the door and opened it wide. He passed without stopping. The lock clicked behind him. I picked the flower up off the floor and dropped it straight into the trash.